Careers. I'm Joan Jack, and my guest today is Karen Parker, and she is Advance News Editor for the Los Angeles Times. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Thank you.
The first question I have to ask you is, what is an advance news editor?
Well, the advance operation of a newspaper is opposed to the daily operation. Advance means exactly what it says. You're working well ahead of your deadline. You have a lot of time to get it ready and hopefully right.
So you work on not the front page of the newspaper then?
Only one edition, which is our Sunday, what we call a Bulldog edition.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one you see in the supermarkets on Saturday morning.
Oh, the Sunday paper that comes out on Saturday.
Right.
So what kind of responsibilities do you have as an advance news editor?
Well, a news editor is responsible for the design of the pages, from the front page all the way through. They're responsible for placement of pictures, what size it will be, where it will be. They need to decide which story they want to feature as the main story, and that usually is in your upper right-hand corner.
So the upper right-hand corner is the prime location on the page then?
Exactly. If you're looking at a right-hand page, and if it's a left-hand page, it's the left-hand corner.
It's the other corner. Then why is it when I look at the front page of the paper, I always look up in the left-hand corner?
Well, I don't know. But usually we're told that the reader's eye goes like this. We start out here, 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 and then drop into here.
So this is actually a lower priority position there.
Right.
It's interesting. So as the news editor, do you select the stories themselves that go onto the page?
Well, usually the stories have been selected by committee.
How does that work?
Well, we have a news meeting. And we get together with our foreign people, our national, our metro or local people, and find out what stories are the best stories. And usually the managing editor, who is boss of us all, decides, well, this is going to be the #1 big story.
Okay. So you have a managing editor, and he's like the big boss. And then
Yes.
underneath him, aside from advanced news editors, what other kind of positions are there?
Well, he has several deputies working under him, and they're broken down by foreign. One man is in charge of foreign and national and financial news, and another man is entirely in charge of metropolitan news, and that includes our suburban editions and our San Diego and our Orange County editions.
Okay. And then where do you fit in under that scheme?
I think I'm probably more working on the national foreign end, though I also handle metro news.
And so your responsibility is how the page looks when the paper finally goes to press.
Right, how it looks, its content, I'm responsible for it, and hopefully there should be no mistakes on it.
Okay, so they give you X number of stories.
Right.
And they say, these are the ones we like the best, and these are the ones we like the least. Lay the page out?
Exactly.
Can you show us a little bit here about how that's done? And technically, this is sort of interesting because you've brought a really good visual piece with you here. And it would be interesting for me, I know, to find out how that works.
Well, mainly, you're working really with a ruler in your hand and a pencil. And we've decided that this is going to be the lead-off story.
Okay.
And being at the top of the page, you know you want it to have a pretty good-sized, thick, deep headline, so it will get attention.
So how do you indicate that?
Now this is what we call a headline order, and this says K2303, which means 2 lines,
Okay.
a 38-point type,
Okay.
2 columns wide, as we see here, 1, 2, and it carries a kicker on it. And this is how that turns out.
Okay, now what's the kicker?
The kicker is this line here. We call that a kicker, the little line on top.
Erosion of democratic loyalty.
Exactly.
Okay. And this is your...
And this is called the main part of the headline.
That's your headline.
Right.
And that's your width and thickness of the type.
Right, exactly. Now down here we have what is called a 226-2, and obviously if you're going down, 26 points is a lot smaller than 38-point type.
Okay. And it's not as wide either, is it?
No, it's not.
Okay, this space up here at the top is where the title of the page
Right,
go
we
in there?
call that the flag.
Okay, so
And
that's
we've-
up here.
Right, and we've made space here. We know it's going to say the Los Angeles Times, so didn't have to write it there.
Okay, now this picture, how have you indicated that?
Okay.
on the chart?
Here is the picture here in the middle. It says fall. There's a fall scene up in the mountains.
Autumn sun shines on changing leaves.
Up in Big Bear. And it says it's 6 3/8 inches wide
Okay.
by 6 inches deep. And it will occupy these columns.
I see. Let's hold the two side by side so we can
Okay.
really get a good idea of what one looks like and what the other one looks like.
Now here's another.
This is just about the regular size too, but this is a different kind of paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
These pages are shot with a laser-like camera and shot onto newsprint and then reproduced. But this is the way it looks when those cameras get it, the finished form. Exactly what you're going to see when you pick up the paper in the morning.
This looks almost like a magazine page rather than a newspaper.
That's because this is very slick and we're looking at a different kind of paper
Right.
here.
Right.
This paper is held on with a wax.
And here?
Yes,
Okay,
in
I
the
can
back.
feel it back here.
Yes. Now here we have another indication. This little line here tells us that this picture is related to this story.
Okay.
So instead of seeing the cutoff rule here, the line,
Oh, I see.
you have a white space saying that these two are connected.
You know, as many papers as I've looked at, I've never seen that before or realized that's how you tell which story. And then, you know, for example, this one isn't going with any story because it
It has the rule
has the bar underneath the whole thing.
For instance, if this picture were to relate to this story, we
Yes.
take that line out.
Right, right. Oh, very interesting. Now, how do you indicate on here that the story is going to be continued somewhere else, or do you bother to do that?
Okay, here it is right here. This RO means run over.
Okay.
And we call it a run-over line. It tells you that this story, Kashmir here,
Right.
is going to be on page 8, and the
Okay.
reader will see, please see Kashmir, page 8-4, whatever.
Right, right. Okay, very good. Well, that's interesting. I certainly would never have known how something like this came together. And this is the sort of thing that you do then.
Yes.
You get your stories, you get big blank pieces of paper, you get your ruler out.
Right.
Now what happens, you get a story from a writer. The story comes into your desk and you say, okay, this is going to go in this section of this day's paper, but it's a little too long.
Well, we get into a problem.
Who edits that then?
Well, it's done by a bank of people called copy editors, and sometimes news editors themselves. Copy editor is a very key person on newspaper. They're the people who last see it before it goes out in public, so they have a tremendous responsibility.
Okay, they last see the story then?
Yes, well, the entire page or pages.
Oh, really? So after you get this whole page mocked up, or whatever you call it, drawn out, after you get that done, then you give it back to the copy editors and they have to proofread it?
Well, what happens is I decide this is going to look like this, and these numbers here, which we call headline orders, the copy editors know exactly what they mean, and I will send the story over to a copy editor and say, put this kind of headline on it.
Oh, so
Okay.
he has to figure something that will fit the type
Into that
and space.
And also, the copy editor's responsibility is the final check over the story for grammar, punctuation, clarity, spelling,
Sounds like my job.
accuracy.
Sounds
And
awfully familiar.
sometimes we know ahead of time that we only have so much room, so we may say to a writer, can you shorten this a little bit? Often we don't find out till we get down on the production floor, and that means that a copy editor or a news editor has to take a pencil to it and say, this goes.
And somewhere across town, a writer feels a knife go through his heart.
Exactly, they love every word.
Does it ever happen that the story is too short?
That happens too, and that's another problem.
Oh.
But we have little tricks for that too.
Yeah.
One trick is you can make the headline bigger.
Right.
You can add a kicker when you didn't have one before. That'll take up a little more space. And then we have a device we call leading.
What's that?
Well, we'll have the computers put fine spaces in between the lines and in between the paragraphs. And it's usually so subtle the reader doesn't see it.
Oh, it's just, you just spread them out.
You're spreading it out more.
So you don't try to write more in the style of the writer.
Not usually. And then, of course, another device we have is called the short. So let's say we had this much space left here, and we'll go find, we never do this on the front page, but we go find a little short that we can put into the
Those
hole.
are the best things in the paper sometimes. Little tiny things, only a paragraph or two, and they can be wonderful. They're ludicrous little stories that appear in the middle of the paper.
Exactly, and sometimes quite informative.
I love those. I love those. Well, I'm glad you need them. This is very interesting to me, seeing how this comes together, and I can't help but wonder what sort of career you've had that brought you to this point. I mean, how did you end up being an advance news editor?
Well, actually, I got into the business quite by accident.
How's that?
Well, I think I was destined to become an English teacher.
Oh, no. But you were saved.
And I was planning on that for 2 years of college, and I had a good reporter friend in my hometown, and he encouraged me to go into journalism.
Where was your hometown, may I ask?
Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is where I started.
A much smaller town than Los Angeles.
Oh, yes. Only about 100,000 people.
Oh, so you would know people like that.
Exactly. I wrote for my high school paper, and he'd come and talk to me now and then, so
how great.
that's how that started.
And then he encouraged you?
Yes.
Well, what did he tell you to do?
Well, two things. One, he told me to go to the University of North Carolina Journalism School, which is in the main campus in Chapel Hill. At the time, I was in Greensboro at another branch. And then he encouraged me to get into our local paper's intern program. And that is something that's readily available on a lot of papers now, if you want to get some background.
Yeah, there are a lot of papers, not just the LA Times, in the Los Angeles area.
Exactly.
You could intern.
And many of them have intern programs. A lot of them sponsor workshops for high school students to get them interested in the job.
Then when you were in college, in addition to journalism, did it matter what you took, or were you encouraged to become knowledgeable in other areas also?
Oh, yes.
Oh, there's something about the smile on your face that lets me know this is good.
Well, you're encouraged to have a very broad background, and to be able to complete your journalism degree, you must have background in sociology,
Okay.
psychology,
All right.
science,
Oh, my.
history, language. Those considered to be extremely important, and they tell you you won't graduate without them.
How many languages?
I only had one.
You only had one?
Well,
What
actually, I
language?
had two. I had two.
Which languages?
Greek and French.
Greek.
I didn't like Latin.
Where did you pick up the Greek?
Well, our graduating requirements were different. I was not good at math, but we could substitute math with Greek or Latin.
Oh, my word.
And I didn't like Latin, so I took Greek.
So you took Greek? How
Yes.
fabulous. Did you learn to read it in the Greek
Well,
alphabet?
I was taking Homeric Greek. Oh, yes, the alphabet. But it resembles nothing
Like modern
Greek
at all?
Not a thing.
So you would go to Greece and you wouldn't recognize the exit signs?
I could recognize that. That's
Yeah.
about all.
That much hasn't changed since Homer. Then were you able to read like the Iliad or the Odyssey
Exactly.
in Greek?
We did those.
Was that neat?
It was fascinating.
Because I teach the Odyssey, obviously translated into English, and I've always wondered, not enough, of course, to learn Homeric Greek, what that would be like.
It's a difficult language.
Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, very good. So you had to get a very broad background in just about everything except engineering, it sounds like.
Just about.
What about English? Do you need an English background as well, or is journalism and English something else entirely?
Oh, that goes without saying. English is everything. Absolutely everything.
You can imagine how often I'm asked, why do we have to learn this? There can't be any cause for it. Why would I have to learn grammar? What's the point of that? Why do you care if I say it this way instead of that way? Are you telling me there really is a point out there for all of this?
There's an absolute point. You'll never make it in this business without it.
Really?
And you better be good at it.
Now, what about, in addition to grammar and usage and vocabulary, obviously, what about literature? Does it help to have a good, broad literary knowledge as well?
Exactly. You must be able to, well, you should be interested in reading. And read just
How
about
interested?
anything, including the cereal box.
Cereal boxes?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, literally. You'd be surprised how strange things like that crop up in a story, or you need the information for a headline, you're trying to make a pun in a
Captain
headline.
Crunch, and it just
Right.
fills in perfectly?
Right, exactly.
So you tell people, read the labels, but not so that you'll be taking good care of your body, but so that you'll be able to take good care of your headlines.
You'll have some nice trivia filed away in case you need it.
Trivia. Now, do you need to know about trivia also? Or?
Well, trivia, most people are either interested in it or they're not.
Yeah.
And trivia buffs usually have a nice file of stuff in the back of their minds, what they call a garbage can mind. It just tumbles in there and stays somehow. And you'd be surprised when you have to dredge up something and what can be there.
You can just bring something up and say, ah, what about this?
Right, and exactly, and you look at yourself and congratulate yourself on your brilliancy.
Okay, so what you've told me so far is that in order to get into journalism like this, you really need to have an extremely broad background.
Exactly, and that includes going to the movies, reading the newspaper and magazines, read the best-selling books, the latest books, be generally aware of what's going on in the world in all places at all times.
You know, that's an awful lot. Is it possible for people really to be that well up on everything, or do you find that one person where you work knows more about one thing and another person knows more about another?
Well, no one person can know everything. That's impossible. So we do try to hire people with a broad range of knowledge, and someone will be better on a topic than another person. For instance, some people are more knowledgeable in science than others, and some people haven't the vaguest notion what a megaton bomb is. No.
Yeah.
So you try to steer, for instance, a science story to the person who is more expert in it.
Right, yes.
Or the history buff, or the expert on Washington, D.C., or those are the examples.
Very good. Now, you said that you went to school in North Carolina, but from there, how did your career advance to the point where it is now? I mean, aside from getting your degree in journalism, what steps did you have to take in order to work in this field and on one of the finest papers supposedly in the nation?
Well, when I started out, my first job application was to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they accepted me as a copy editor. And
so off you went to Grand Rapids?
Exactly, and I did sports news editing, I did a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And I worked there a while, and I went on to Rochester, New York, doing the same kinds of things.
Well, you got to move around.
Yes. Then I came to California, and I took out some time to raise a family.
Okay.
But then I went back to work at the Los Angeles Times, which is one place I always wanted to work, and I always admired the paper, so I was very pleased to be there.
When you first started with the Times, what sort of work were you doing for them?
Well, I was a copy editor on the Times National Desk. I moved there to the Times Metropolitan Desk, which is one of the toughest desks on the paper. Everything is late and it's critical and you have to watch it. It's a lot of pressure. And from there to the Advanced Desk, and finally as Advanced News Editor.
Wow. So that's awfully good, isn't it? I think
so.
I think I'm proud of you. I think you should be too.
I won't complain.
Now, if someone were to go, say I had a student who was really interested in journalism, and I said, gee, you know, I know this woman who works down at the LA Times, and I bet she'd be willing to talk to you. What kind of advice would you give, say a high school senior who would be interested in getting involved in journalism?
Okay. For instance, the workshops.
Okay.
There are several newspapers in Southern California who sponsor these workshops. I believe Long Beach is one. The Times does. Some others do. This information is available. The newspapers will set up, for instance, a weekend seminar, 2 days, and teach you about the ins and out of the newspaper business. And you'll get an idea whether you really want to go into this.
Yeah. Is this interesting to me, or was it boring all weekend long?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you'll get a feeling for this. And if you're really interested, you can go on to the next step. First of all, you want to go to school and get a good broad education. 2 years of your background education. Then the last 2 years you start concentrating on journalism.
So the first 2 years you'd be taking psychology and sociology, languages and English.
Right. The required courses, the things that they will require no matter what your major is.
Right.
And then on to journalism school.
Okay. During this time, should a person be involved in, say, school newspapers?
That helps tremendously.
Does it?
And I also advise anyone wanting to go into an editing career to try some writing first.
Ah.
You need to understand what it's like on the other side of the fence, what those reporters are going through. And their job is tough too.
It'd be like if someone were a doctor and they'd never even had a headache in their entire life.
Right.
Yes. It would be hard to take criticism from someone who'd never written anything. I see. Any other general advice for them?
Yes. While in journalism school, that's when you have an opportunity to get into an intern program. And several papers have those. The Times has quite an extensive one. you're able to, in some schools, spend a semester doing nothing but working as a reporter on the paper.
And
or
that's
a
your
copy
whole
editor.
semester's credit?
Yes, and they'll give you credit for it in some schools.
Very good. Now,
And you're getting some good background experience.
do you know some schools off the top of your head that are particularly renowned for their journalism departments?
Yes, here in Los Angeles is Cal State Northridge.
Really? How
Yes.
interesting.
Cal State Dominguez Hills. University of Southern California, of course.
Really, USC?
Yes. UCLA does not have an undergrad journalism department.
Oh,
at the
really?
time.
You have to
They
be
do not.
graduate?
Well, they don't have a graduate program anymore either. They
Really?
abolished that. Don't ask me why, but they
They've
did.
just sort of let USC have that one.
Yes. So USC is good, and see, Dominguez Hills, and we have several Times personnel who teach at these colleges.
Right.
Long Beach is another one.
Long
Cal
Beach State.
State, Long Beach. And these people cooperate with the paper and help to see that their students have an opportunity to get into a Times intern program.
And then you went to school in North Carolina.
In North Carolina.
And they have a good program also there.
My paper, my local paper, had a good program,
Right.
and I spent 2 summers with them.
Very good. That's interesting to me. I'm sure, because in all professions there are problems, there have to be sides to this business that are the pitfalls, little things about the business that can be hard to take, that maybe people should know about before they spend a lot of time daydreaming about seeing their page on the inside of the Sunday paper, assistant editor, da-da-da-da-da.
What students should be aware of, it's like with anything, there's a good side and a bad side. One thing about this business is don't go in it to make money. With the exception of the largest papers in the country, like the LA Times, New York Times, Chicago Trib, Washington Post, you're not likely to be making a lot of money, especially starting off. You'll probably devote a few years before you're making the kind of money that you could probably even decently live on.
Oh my.
You should go into it for love. They tell you that at the beginning.
Yes.
Oh, no, you can live on it in these days, in this day and age. But some small papers pay very little. It's
They don't have the base to pay
exactly,
anybody
they don't
from.
have the money. They
Right.
plain don't have it. But most people who do start in small papers go for the love of the work.
I see. What about other problems? Are there other problems too?
Another problem is the editing in can be a thankless job.
How do you mean?
Well, on most papers, copy editors and news editors end up being the goat of the paper. A common complaint is, I do 1,000 things right, and I make one little mistake, and everybody screams and yells about it. And that's true.
Is it?
When things are going well, nobody tends to pay any attention. If one thing goes wrong, people scream and yell.
So one day my girlfriend was going through the travel section of the LA Times and she found an ad for a Geek Island cruise. And she loved it so much she cut it out and sent it to me in the mail, and I took it and tacked it up on my refrigerator. I don't know, it was up there for a year, and people would come through and we'd laugh about going on the Geek Island tour. And somewhere some poor editor was weeping.
Well, there will probably be the advertising department, but whichever editor was looking at that page should have seen that.
Should have seen that. So you need a good eye.
A very good eye. A very good eye.
Any other pitfalls like hours or...
Well, your hours are likely to be regular. However, if you're working for a morning paper, you're going to be working at night.
I see.
That is usually about 2 o'clock till about 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock.
Ah.
And if you're working for an evening paper, you might have to go in at the crack of dawn.
I think I'll work for the morning paper. Thank you very much. What about, I mean, I'm sure there have to be rewards, or you wouldn't have gone back and stayed in the business.
The rewards are many too. One is to pit yourself against your work, and when it comes out, when you manage to make that wonderful headline fit into that little bitty space, it's a really great feeling.
A little victory.
Yes. If you've written one that has a witty pun, that's a tremendous feeling.
Yeah.
When you've gone through a crisis, let's say a major plane crash, when you have a long, hard night and you stay late and you work hard trying to get the right details in at the last minute, it's extremely fulfilling. And another thing I like, this kind of kept me going, is you work with some interesting people.
Do you?
Very few newspaper people are dull.
Oh, really? Do you have any good stories for us?
No. One thing we always ask ourselves is like which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did we go into this business because we were already crazy, or did we become crazy after we got there?
Or did it do it to us?
Right. We don't know. No one's ever come up with the answer, though we tend to go with you were probably a little crazy before you started out.
Are there a lot of women in the business?
There are more and more women in the business.
Okay, like compared to when you started?
When I started, there were practically no women in the business. And the women reporters and women editors were unheard of.
Really?
Absolutely unheard of.
And now all of a sudden?
There are many more of them, but we still have fewer women editors than we have reporters.
Were you ambitious when you were young? Did you say, I'm going to be an editor?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, my goal was to be a managing editor by the time I was 30, but 30 is long behind me, and I'm not.
Yes, but you're working for one of the biggest papers in the country.
That is satisfaction in itself.
Were you a reporter for a time?
Yes, I started out as a reporter.
What kind of reporting did you do?
In Winston-Salem, North Carolina, you did everything.
Oh, yeah?
You did religion, you did Chamber of Commerce meetings, the lawyer opened up a new office, obituaries, weddings. You start off with a little bit of everything to give yourself a broad background.
Did you ever get sent to cover something that you just didn't know anything about?
Yes. You fake
What was it?
Well, I remember doing an interview with a man when I was in Michigan, and he had some important post at the University of Michigan, and I couldn't, for life of me, fathom exactly what it was. And I just pretty much opened up things and let him talk, and I wrote it down because I really did not know what I was after.
Right.
And that will happen sometimes. You just have to play it by ear.
I think reporters dream about having that great story. Did you have a fantasy of writing a really great story someday?
Of course, we all want to win the Pulitzer Prize.
Having Ronald Reagan call you up on the telephone and say, I was glancing through the LA Times and I just had to tell you your story was brilliant.
We all want to win the Pulitzer Prize. We all want the glamour and the glory. But the truth of the matter is very few people find glamour and glory.
Really?
You'll find some satisfaction, but not glamour and glory. And that should be understood readily. You know, Watergate spawned a lot of interest in journalism.
Ah, yes.
And so many students decided that that's what they wanted to do, just because it seemed like Woodward and Bernstein.
Yes.
Most of the time, you're going to school board meetings in the Chamber of Commerce.
And Woodward and Bernstein spent a lot of hours tracking down leads that didn't go anywhere, even for that great story.
Exactly. It can be very, very frustrating. And sometimes you can work very hard on a story, and the editors decide they don't like it, and
that's
goodbye.
it. Goodbye. Well, this has been very interesting for me. I'm really glad you came to talk to us. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to say quickly?
Well, let me think for a second. Well, again, I'll say to any student who's interested, please prepare yourself.
Okay.
Don't go into this business unless you have some hankering toward writing, reading, and you know your English and you know it well.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. I think it was very interesting. And thank you for joining us. This is Careers. We'll see you again. Now we sit here and talk. I'll be able to put the credits on our face.